Hi, everyone. Today we're going to look at the prescient science in the book of Job. Now, Job is a book that is rewritten by Moses in about 1250 BC, according to Jewish rabbinical tradition. And that's why it's in the Bible, because Moses wrote it. But they all agree that this was a story of a man who lived about 500, maybe 300 years earlier in what was a non-Jewish culture in the land of Ur. And in the book of Job, are prescient statements of fact, meaning he foreknew something that you would only know through scientific means with telescopes and things of that sort. Maybe you could figure out that the world was spherical, but in 1250 BC or 1500 BC, when Job is actually first written and when Moses is rewriting it, it's hard to imagine they had the capability of the methods that you could determine it's spherical. But that's not impossible. But what would be highly unlikely is they would imagine a spherical Earth that itself is being rotated or moved, because we don't have any sense of movement as we're on the Earth, and we think the sun is what's moving around us, and that would have been what you would naturally see. But what if you found out that God is, from God's perspective, the Earth is rotating as it's going around the sun, and that would not come to their mind without a lot of scientific theorems and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to see that the God of the Bible discloses that the Earth is not just a sphere, but it's rotating in a circle. It's going around and around like a clay pot on a potter's wheel, and the sun's heat is like a seal going around the perimeter of that clay pot. That's the exact image that God, when he speaks, says. So he basically refutes that your observations are correct, that it's a flat earth and it's not moving. He's telling you it moves. It's being rotated every day. So God's wiser than us, and in fact, he makes everything look like it's a flat earth on a stationary plane, so that when you look back at the book of Job, you'll see the person who wrote this book knew something that nobody could know just by looking out and observing just regular facts. You couldn't deduce all these things from that. Okay, so let's just see what we could deduce. So it's always good to ask a physics professor. Hank Schuring, a physics professor, was asked this kind of question, and he gave this answer to Quora. You can see things that will lead you to the conclusion that the Earth is curved, like the ancient Greeks did, without telescopes or theodolites. One, they already noticed that ships or islands disappeared behind the horizon, but if you climbed a cliff near the shore, you could see a lot more of them. In other words, the reason they're disappearing is there's a curve. And so when they go over the edge of that curve, they don't fall off anything. They're literally still there, but you can't see them from the shore. And the reason that explains that is there's a curve in the Earth. Two, they were clever enough to understand that the always circular shadow of the Earth during a lunar eclipse had to be the shadow of a sphere. Okay, so you just have to look up at the moon. What's that shadow? It's a circle. All right. But again, we from our perspective, the moon is moving, and actually the moon does move. Okay, so we see the moon moving and we see the sun moving. So the phenomenon that we see is, technically, we see a flat Earth, but if we live near the shoreline, we could just figure out it was circular for the reason I just said. Or if you looked up during a lunar eclipse, you would notice the circle on the moon, and you'd say the Earth is somehow between the sun and the moon, and therefore we are a sphere. But the issue of movement and being rotated is not obvious. We don't have any sense of motion. So not only do we perceive only a flat Earth with our eyes, we also perceive a stationary Earth. So it's a stationary flat Earth is what our eyes see and feel, but it's a spherical Earth that's being rotated. And that's what the God Yahweh is going to say when he jumps into the story and starts talking. But also Job will have some statements that are pretty remarkable in and of themselves. There are other ways to know the Earth is curved, and they're listed there in 3 if you want. Screenshot it, and you can study that. But that means that they could know it was curved if they just used a little bit of logic with the lunar eclipse, and they lived near the shoreline, and they could see the ships going over the horizon, jump up on the cliff, and still see the ships. They'd figure it out. Okay. Now here's Job making a statement. So this is not God speaking. He stretches out the north, the polar star. And we have to know there's a star that basically establishes, it always is in the north, but it actually goes in a small circle every day, just so you know how it works. And then it says he hangs the earth on nothing. Now that's pretty remarkable. I would say that's, how can he be hanging it on nothing? We have to sit on something. So the earth appears stationary, and you would think the reason it's stationary is that it's stable on something else. So, like there's a mountain below us or something, or an endless surface below us. So even if it were a ball, you could mount a ball on top of a physical object. So to believe that you're floating in space, that's pretty amazing. Okay, but here's where it gets to the point where only God could know this, that the Earth is not only spherical, but it's also rotating, and it's turning around. Okay, and so let's look at this. Have you ever? So this is God speaking, Yahweh speaking in Job 38 verses 12 to 14. And I combined the NIV and the KJV because there was some clarity that was better by doing that. Have you ever given orders to the morning or caused the day spring, and that means the sun, the morning sun, to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth? The earth is turned as clay to seal, and they, that's the sun and earth, stand as a garment. So I'm going to show you, when you study clay pot manufacturing, you're going to understand what it means. But just let's look at it. So it's talking about the sun. The morning sun knows its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth. So the sun is somehow taking hold of the end of the earth, and we know what that is. That's called gravity, and its gravity is what holds us in our orbit. Just so if you didn't know. Without the sun's gravity, we would fly out to the Netherlands. Okay, I don't mean Netherlands, the country, the nether regions of the universe. And they, the sun and earth, stand as a garment. So from God's perspective, he sees the earth and the sun standing in space separately, like you would hang a garment somewhere, okay, on a string. And okay, so let's take a look at clay pot manufacture, because it says takes hold of the ends of the earth. So imagine you had a clay pot, and you're going to turn and spin it on a potter's wheel, which I'm going to show you. That's what this is an imagery of. You then are turning it, and then sometimes you would make a seal or a mark on the periphery of the clay pot when it's still hot and warm, and you would then use that to do markings and designs on the exterior of the clay pot. And so that's the reference here. The earth is turned as clay to a seal. So let's get that imagery in our mind by doing some study. Okay, so I guess the first thing I wanted to point out is what I already just said, is the sun takes hold of the ends of the earth. That is, we now know the sun's gravitational pull is the primary hold over the earth's orbit in space. Okay, so now again, the earth is turned as clay to the seal. What is that? This says the earth is a clay pot on a potter's wheel, and the sun impresses itself on earth just as a potter holds a seal to carve a line in clay as it's rotated. Okay, so I'm going to show you that from books. Okay, so the earth, so we'll review the verse again. The earth is turned as clay to the seal, and they, the earth and sun, stand or hang as a garment on nothing, basically. To turn a clay pot, okay, so this is from the Macmillan Visual Dictionary, New York, 1992, at page 584. To turn a clay pot, one had to hold the clay at both ends, meaning the top by one's hand, so you put your hand inside the mouth of the clay pot, and the bottom through the support of the potting wheel itself. So, so that holds it in both places. And then you would rotate it. The wheel would turn a circular surface that the pot is laying on, and that would turn in a circle, and that would let you then take a stake, or, well, I'll show you. There's other descriptions. So you then have to seal it, to add a seal or an inscription on the pot or design. you have to turn it while you're holding the seal to the pot. And we'll get to that next. And this is from a encyclopedia that my mom and dad got when I was a kid, Funk and Wagnall's Encyclopedia. You got it once a week at the local A&P supermarket, and so it served me well. In an article called Pottery, it said this: in pottery manufacture, while rotating the clay, an imprint was added either by, quote, thumb patterns or raked surfaces with a stick or rake that were straight, crossed, or zigzag. Okay, so actually you could use just your thumb to add a kind of a design onto the pot, or you would use some sort of stick or other objects that could then design on it. But the idea is that while you're rotating it, you can add these seals. Okay, in the next slide, we're going to see a video of someone using, it's this video here, clay pottery, primitive earthenware art potter making Roman-style prehistoric pottery. And by the way, it has 3 million views. So there's still people who love to do these type of things. And the example provided here is how to imprint a seal onto the pottery. So you have to rotate it, and then it will automatically create a type of seal or allow you to make an imprint. So so let's watch it, and we'll give you an idea of what God is talking about. All right, so we'll watch this video, and it's going to reveal to you. So as the pottery maker turns the wheel, and in the old days this would be controlled by a foot pedal, and then as it turns, the potter maker can then take a stick or other objects and create a seal around as it's spinning, as it's rotating. And this is just like it says in the verse, the earth is turned as clay to the seal. And so that imprints something onto the earth from outside the earth. And that is what the sun is doing. It hangs like a garment, and the earth hangs as a garment. But as the sun's looking towards the earth, it brings design, it brings plants and animals growing and nurturing and warming the planet. So this is a providential system that God has created, and it's just exactly like that. There's a rotating earth, and the sun is like a seal to the earth. Okay, so thus the imagery in Job from God speaking was of a fresh clay pot or jar spinning, rotating, while a seal was being imprinted as the clay was turned or rotated. Yahweh says the earth is turned as clay to the seal of the sun in the very same way. This means the earth moves in rotation relative to the sun and not vice versa. And thus the Bible says the earth and sun are not laying flat, but are hanging like clothes hang, suspended in air. And again, this is not something you could know from just looking at the circle on the moon in a lunar eclipse. You couldn't know just by seeing boats going over the horizon and then going up on a hill and looking. You could see the curvature of the earth, you could see the sphere, but you don't understand rotation, and you don't understand how there could be suspension of objects in space. It just wouldn't make sense. Okay, so when the science first proved that the Earth rotated, it was a guy named Leon Foucault demonstrating his device that would do that very thing. This is in APS News this month in physics history, and he did this. Where is this? Okay, so as early as Galileo's time, scientists had tried to demonstrate Earth's rotation by dropping objects and measuring how far eastward they landed, but these efforts were too crude and inaccurate to be conclusive. So still then, they weren't absolutely sure. They couldn't prove it. Then Leon Foucault demonstrated that you could do it. There was clear dynamical proof of the Earth's rotation. And he used a pendulum basically to do that. It's called Foucault's pendulum. He successfully completed the experiment in his basement, and he was ready to try it on a larger scale. And February 2nd, 1851, he sent a notice to scientists in Paris saying, you were invited to see the Earth turn. So it was kind of a humorous thing. Anyway, that's when it was done, and was suspected in the time of Galileo that we were rotating. Now the question is, did anyone ever have an earlier suspicion that we were rotating before Galileo? And when was that? So let's study the Greek scientists, and you're going to see they didn't really perceive that, because it's not something you can perceive from the evidence. You can't tell that we are not the center of the universe just sitting here. So they believed everything's rotating around us, the sun's rotating around us, and so on. So it was a geocentric universe, and heliocentrism didn't exist. And so even if we did rotate around the sun, they didn't even suspect that we're moving or rotating itself. So the actual first proof of our rotation is truly Leon Foucault. But we'll go through the Greek scientists next. Okay, so there's an excellent summary of ancient Greek astronomy and their conclusions. And we're going to see that their predominant view ruled out and made it sound impossible that the Earth rotated itself because it didn't have to move. We were in a geocentric universe. And even if the sun were at the center, there was arguments against it rotating as it would go around the sun. So there were multiple reasons why the minority view of heliocentrism, meaning the sun is at the center of things, was not accepted in Greek science, and why it rejected that there was a rotation. But there was one scholar who said that it did rotate in place, but his view was considered wrong. So that means there was some progress, but there was a lot of resistance to it, and therefore it didn't become a predominant view. But at least we're going to see why it came about and see what the proofs were. But this is also going to be 3rd century BC. It's not 1500 BC. And these people have all kinds of mathematics, Pythagorean theorems, and ways of calculating geometry was invented. You need all kinds of mathematical tools in order to figure out, for example, parallaxes and all kinds of things that were measuring the sky and making a deduction about our universe. So none of that existed at the time of Job, but this just shows you what you would need to figure out to do it. So in ancient Greek astronomy, we have, and this is lecture 4 at the Ohio State University website for, it looks like Professor Weinberg, and it's his lecture number 4. And he's going to ask, why did the Greek philosophers believe in a spherical Earth? So they got that right. They just didn't get the idea that we were not at the center of the universe. And they claimed that the Earth was a sphere because ships disappear over the horizon. We've already seen that's an obvious proof. Positions of the constellation above the horizon change as one goes north or south. That's the difference between the North Star and when you move below the equator. Yes, that's another proof. And then the Earth casts a round shadow on the moon during a lunar eclipse. Yes, that shows we're a sphere because the sun is on the other side and we're in the middle, creating a sphere will create a circle on the moon. So they figured that one out. That's pretty obvious. And then, but now we're in a geocentric universe. We don't have Earth rotating yet, right? They concluded, and these are the arguments that left, there was an exception. Aristarchus is the guy who's going to say, no, I think we're also rotating. Here are the arguments that were brought against him. Arguments against daily Earth rotation. If Earth rotated once per day, the surface would be moving very fast. Absolutely correct. Based on the diameter, they figured out the diameter of Earth. To spin that around in 24 hours it takes at least 14,000 miles per hour to do that. That's not the time it takes for us to get around the sun in 365 days requires 67,000 miles per hour of the Earth moving relative to the sun. But our spinning around and completing based on our size is a 14,000 mile per hour speed, and you would have objects seemingly flying off the Earth. What wasn't accounted for is gravity and our atmosphere. And those things counterbalance that speed, so we have no perception of speed as we're moving in a rotation every 24 hours. They also said that dropped objects should fly backwards. So if you drop something on the ground and you're traveling 14,000 miles in a circle, as you're doing that, why isn't it behind you by the time you look down? But it doesn't happen. It falls right below your feet. And again, that's the force of gravity and the protection of our environment, our atmosphere. And then it says maybe there should be heavy winds as well. Do you see that here? So yeah, we should have extreme winds all the time. But We don't have that. So they couldn't imagine that we're actually rotating, and they couldn't imagine the effects of gravity, couldn't measure the protection that the atmosphere provides us. That just didn't, because you can't see anything in the atmosphere. They didn't understand there's things. The atmosphere has content and does things to protect us. And then, of course, they were still stuck in the geocentric world, which they didn't see constellations get bigger and smaller on Earth as they get closer and further away. Well, that's because they're so far away, there's no parallaxes. There's no way of saying, hey, you know, that star is still where it was last night, and we've moved, and if we're moving, that should have moved. But some stars aren't moving. Other stars, they thought the planets were stars, they're moving every 24 hours. So how come these other stars aren't moving? So they concluded we must be in the middle of the universe. We must be the center of the universe, because why are these distant stars not moving? They just didn't realize they're so far away that the motion can't even, there's no relative motion as we go around the sun that you're going to ever notice these suns moving. These stars, distant stars, billions of light years away, they're not going to move or shift on a 24-hour scale. You're never going to detect it. All right, and more generally, they didn't see the effects of parallax, which is what I just mentioned, apparent change of position caused by a moving observer. So they ruled out the sun. No way could it be the center of the universe. So the Greeks were stuck. They didn't understand the distance of time of light for the smallest stars was due to the distance effect. Okay, and then they came up with an idea to explain all the motion that we're actually seeing, as there are multiple different spheres. So the planets are in one sphere, the stars are in different spheres. The stars called the planets were also stars. They're so close, they're in their own sphere, and then there's these other lights way beyond them in their own sphere, and they kind of got that right if you think about it, but it was wrong. You know, there's planets and then there's stars, but to them it was all lights, and that's all that mattered to them. So they just saw it as one type of thing they're looking at, and then it turned out they're not. They're looking at planets versus stars way in the distance. So they missed that. But then they started getting smart, and this is where Aristarchus started going down the path where he would figure out that we are indeed rotating. But his proofs were not accepted for all the reasons I mentioned. The wind and the things that should fall to the ground should fall behind you, and so on. So what was this? Well, first progress was made by Eratosthenes of Cyrene in the 3rd century. So just figuring out the size of the Earth was key to then being able to figure out the relative size of the sun could explain certain reasons why we have to be rotating. We must be moving around the sun. Okay, but it's still not going to prove enough to prove we're rotating. We'll see. Although Aristarchus is going to take this one step further, and he's going to reach that conclusion. So then they had to figure out the diameter and distance of the moon, and they did it almost very accurately. And then they had to figure out the distance and diameter of the sun, and the Greeks did that again. So they were pretty close on. And the diameter of the moon. And what was very important, the qualitative conclusion is correct. The sun is bigger than Earth, and Earth is bigger than the moon. But they had other they didn't realize how much bigger the sun was. The sun is really much bigger than Earth, as he puts it here. All right, so then they ended up with Aristarchus, I should say. Aristarchus concluded in heliocentric cosmos. So we're going to pause here, and I'm going to do a separate little slide on him. Okay, so now we're going to look at the minority view, and this is from Aristarchus, who is about the 200s BC. And so he reasoned the sun is bigger than Earth, and it's harder to move. This led him to propose a heliocentric model of the cosmos, meaning the sun's the center, which means we're going around the sun. And he's going to actually suggest that we are rotating, contrary to the presumed view that that's impossible because of the wind factor, that the objects falling to the ground should be behind us, and so on. So he's going to insist it's otherwise. So this led him to propose a heliocentric model of the cosmos. The sun is the center of the universe. Earth and the planets orbit the sun. Big major move. He did get the solar system right, but the sun is not the center of the universe. The daily motions produced by rotation of Earth. So he's finally suggesting that Earth is rotating. He sees different stars at different times of year because Earth orbits the sun. So he got that. But you can't see stars during the day. So he started to figure out that we are orbiting the sun, and that would explain these differences. Retrograde motion occurs when planets overtake each other. So again, he's seeing that we're in a system of the planets. Some are moving faster relative to other planets encircling the sun, which is absolutely the case. Some are going slower, some are going faster. The planets are brightest when moving retrograde because that's when they are closest, and that's true. An impressive achievement. Has major ingredients of modern understanding of the solar system. It has major ingredients of modern understanding of the solar system. Why was it not accepted? The arguments against Earth rotation and motion seemed convincing. The authority of Aristotle, yes, he's very important. And it was not developed into a quantitatively accurate theory until Copernicus and Kepler. So the first people who actually solved this problem was Copernicus. And this is in the era of Galileo, and that's why at that time the views started to shift scientifically that the Earth is rotating, and it's, of course, we're circling the sun. So again, a very good effort by Aristarchus. He got very close. But again, we're talking second century. How could Job have known this 1,300 years earlier? That's my point. And it defies visual observation. It doesn't make sense that you would ever think the planet Earth is rotating just like a clay vase or a clay pot on a potter's wheel is being turned, and the sun is beating down its heat to kind of seal the clay pot as you're spinning it around and putting little marks on the side. Little plants are being grown and whatever by the sun, by the potter, and the potter's wheel is spinning. That is rotating Earth. And it's not saying anything at all about the sun, the Earth going around the sun yet. But it's saying the most important fact that you cannot see scientifically. It's so hard to determine this that it didn't even get proposed for another 1,300 years. And even then, it was so unconvincing by the same people who were scientifically able to figure out a lot of other things. He was rejected. Basically, his view didn't make sense, and yet he was correct. And that wasn't proved until another 1,700 years that his view could be acceptable. Copernicus and Kepler. And then, of course, Galileo started moving forward with all this. And then it took until the 1800s that rotation of the Earth could actually be proven for the first time. So you see, that was an amazing, amazing truth that God only could have revealed to humanity through his word, through this message to Job, that Moses picked up. God, who picked Moses from heaven? It was God speaking from heaven down to Sinai and told Moses. He must have told Moses, I want you to, this story is my account. I confirm it, and I'll give you more words. Maybe there was some words that had to be added to give God's side of the story. Who knows? It's a story, and God can fill in the details to Moses. And there it is. It's an absolute fact that Moses said this is what happened, and this is how it happened, and this is what God said. That is a very strong confirmation, by the way, of Moses as a true prophet of God, and in an amazing way, too. He could not possibly himself have known this. We can see that. And there was nothing in Egyptian astronomy that matched this kind of conclusion about the Earth rotating. Okay, so I think that's the end of this excursion into Greek science to explore when did it first get proposed. And this is the first time, 2nd century BC, rotation of the Earth. Okay, so the words in Job 26:10, again, this is 1500 BC is when it was really first created, becomes Moses adopts it. He has made spherical, hok or hug in Hebrew means to make spherical, the waters with bounds until the day and night come to an end. The Hebrew word hok or hug here is defined in concordance to the Hebrew and Chaldee scriptures by B. Davidson as a circle or a sphere. Here it is often translated as make an horizon, but it can mean make spherical. And we now know, I mean, you can't deny what's in your eyes. You can see it from space, and it's a sphere, right? Barnes' Bible Notes gives a little bit more detail. He has compassed the waters with bounds, is the way it's usually translated. The word rendered compassed, or chug, that's his version of the hug, means to describe a circle, to mark out with a compass, and the reference is to the form of the horizon, which appears as a circle and which seems to be marked out with a compass. Okay, but again, the Chaldee dictionary we referred to earlier says it can include the concept of a sphere, and that's what it more accurately obviously meant. All right, and while the next reference is not in the book of Job, it's also in the Bible itself. It's Proverbs 8:27. The wisdom of God is spoken in a personified way as an advisor to God, and it says, quote, when he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him. So again, it's talking about God drawing a circle on the face of the oceans. And from above, it would be, yes, actually, you would see a circle, but you would know it's also a sphere at the same time. It's a circle. And again, there's another passage that's not in the book of Job, but it says something similar. That's Isaiah 40, verse 22. It says, it is he who sits above the circle of the earth. The Riri note says this term circle or zenith, quote, allows for the concept that the earth is a sphere. Yes. But again, that's not that remarkable because you can see the circle of the planet Earth on the moon during a lunar eclipse. So, but the real factor here is the issue about rotation. That is not something that you would know by any scientific means until Aristarchus could figure out the weights of the sun and the moon and Earth, and therefore conclude how they interconnect to one another. Okay, but now let's put ourselves back into the era when Job is first written, which is 200 to 300 years even before Moses. We're talking around 1500, rewritten in 1250 BC by Moses. So please note all these statements by Job about the earth hanging on nothing and is spherical, and by God saying that the sun holds the ends of the earth as it is rotated like a clay pot on a potter's wheel, while the sun sets its seal on it, are unobservable truths to those lacking scientific means to see. Only divine knowledge can explain their origin. Otherwise, the phenomenon we all see would reflect a flat, stationary earth in 1500 BC. Hence, God's word knew what looks flat is not flat, but we live on a sphere, and what does not appear to move is rotating. Okay, so I think that tells you a lot, that you can be confident that there is a God, number one. He knows things that we don't know. And the oldest book of the Bible, prior to even the law and the prophets and all of that, was the book of Job. This is Jewish tradition of where that book came from. It was way, way hundreds of years before Moses picked it up and said, I'm going to rewrite this. So this gives you lots of good confidence that there is a God in the universe, number one, because this is not otherwise known. And number two is that Moses knew this story and rewrote it, and therefore he was a prophet of God, and God spoke over him in front of all the people at Mount Sinai, so they could see that God had ordained him. He's the one picking that book up from the past and then reviving it and then stating these things in basically a completely divine way, meaning otherwise, if God's not channeling, God is not giving them these messages, how could he possibly know these things? How could Moses? He was raised in Pharaoh's court. That's true, but they didn't have any astrology or astronomy, that would reflect this kind of reality. So anyway, that's the more confidence that we can put in the God who Jesus was praying to and who Jesus called the only true God in John 17, 1-3. Okay, God bless. Take care, everybody. Ciao.